Why, hello, it is I, the resident nitpicking historian here to wreck your opinion of yet another fictional historical epic. Could I have done something more festive considering the season? Yes, probably. But I felt we needed something a little lighter in tone after exploring the idea of death and funerals last month.
Uncover her.
Well, lighter in the fact that this is an uplifting feminist biopic of one of England's most talked about and enduring queens, Elizabeth I. This is the film that got us all asking whether Cate Blanchett is good or just tall, as she was nominated for her first Oscar for her role in Elizabeth in a year where Judi Dench won Best Supporting Actress for being the exact same historical person. And it is a very well-beloved film. It seems very respectable in that traditional British period drama way that always does so well at the box office and at the Academy. It's got prestige, darling, prestige oozing out of every frame, but I'm here to unpick the question. Is it fact or is it fiction? The film follows the young Elizabeth as she weathers through the trials and tribulations of coming into power and actually being a queen. She witnesses the cruelty and injustice of her older sister's reign, is accused of treason, and comes close to being executed, but fate intervenes and she accedes to the throne. But wickedness is afoot as a Catholic conspiracy of England's most powerful nobles and some of those closest to her, and Elizabeth faces losing her throne, potentially her head, and more importantly, her heart. And the cast is entirely of British and Australian prestige actors, or those who end up routinely popping up in BBC productions as the notable face who ends up being the villain. With that out the way, let's discuss the events of the film chronologically and sort through what's real and what was made up for the sake of drama. The opening 20 minutes detail a single event at the start of Mary I's reign in a general vagueness of time that sort of skips over several key details and manages to last both no time and also 5 years.
May I join you, my lady?
If it please you, sir.
Robert Dudley was imprisoned at this point in time due to his involvement in an earlier failed rebellion, because this part of the 16th century is what we in the know call an immense mess. Protestant nobility had benefited from Henry VIII's and Edward VI's Protestant-leaning policies attempted to help Edward, yes, Mary's own brother, instill a Protestant queen instead. Lady Jane Grey, Tudor cousin and future fact or fiction candidate, was put on the throne for 9 days before Mary pushed her off and started her own Roman Catholic reign. And this was not particularly popular with those same people, which led to this rebellion, Wyatt's Rebellion.
What news, my lords, of the rebellion against our authority?
Sussex?
Madam, it is safely dispatched, thanks to His Grace.
Sir Thomas Wyatt and the other leaders are already dealt with.
But if they had succeeded, these Protestants and heretics meant to place your sister upon the throne.
There is no proof against the Lady Elizabeth.
She's plainly guilty.
What need is there of proof?
As long as she remains alive, there will be plots to raise her to the throne.
Wyatt's rebellion was aimed at stopping Mary I from marrying Philip, King of Spain, and replacing her with Elizabeth, who would marry her other Plantagenet cousin, the Earl of Devon. The idea was that 4 leaders would lead sort of mini rebellions across the country, but they'd all sort of collapse, leaving Wyatt to try and take London by himself, and it all just went well tits up.
You are accused of conspiring with Sir Thomas Wyatt and others against Her Sovereign Majesty, and are arrested for treason. I am commanded to take you hence from this place to the Tower.
I cannot confess to something I
did not do.
Your denials are all in vain.
You of the rebellion, madam, you were party to it. It is plain enough.
Where is your proof?
It was to your advantage.
You must let me see the Queen.
You despise the Queen and the Catholic faith.
I am a true and faithful subject. I attend Mass.
You pretend, but in your heart.
What's that? What say you, madam? Speak up!
The leaders were arrested, some being executed, others exiled or imprisoned, but Elizabeth was arrested and interrogated for her potential involvement. There was no concrete evidence linking her to the plot, although how much she knew is hotly debated amongst historians, so while she was at risk of execution for a while, she was instead imprisoned in the Tower of London for a time before being confined to house arrest. Her chambers in the Tower were also nothing like the ones shown in the film. She's nobility and a royal prisoner, so she got the fancy cells to reflect her. After being in house arrest for about a year, Elizabeth returned to her sister's court and to her own house, Hatfield, where she began to make plans and connections for her own rule.
The Queen is dead! Long live the Queen! Long live the Queen!
This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvellous in our eyes.
These are the words that Elizabeth is recorded as saying when she heard the news that she had become queen.
I crown thee, Elizabeth, Queen of England, Ireland, and France. God save your majesty.
And yes, Elizabeth was crowned as Queen of France, along with being Queen of England and Ireland. It was part of the old Lancastrian claim to be kings of France, and up until a year before her coronation, England had still controlled areas of France. The port of Calais and the surrounding area had been part of England, until they were lost by Mary I as part of the 8th Italian War between France and the Habsburgs. What is not covered is just how difficult it was to get Elizabeth crowned. The Archbishop of Canterbury, who should do the deed, was dead. He died in the same epidemic that killed Mary, and no one had taken his place yet. The other senior bishops were too Catholic, too ill, too likes-kill Protestants for Elizabeth to have them. Owen Oglethorpe, Bishop of Carlisle, was forced into doing it. He decided to raise the host during the ceremony, pissing Elizabeth off so much that she walked out of her own coronation. Then he was sacked, and then he died.
Majesty should know that you have inherited a most parlous and degenerate state. It's threatened from abroad by the ambitions of France and Spain, and is weaker in strength, in men, monies, and riches than I have ever known it.
What are you saying?
Madam, your treasury is empty. The navy is run down. There is no standing army, and we are bare of munitions. There is not a fortress left in England that could withstand a single shot.
I have no desire to go to war, sir.
But that is not the end of it. Apart from abroad, here at home there are those who wish your majesty ill. Mary of Scots has already laid claim to your throne. And Norfolk covets it relentlessly.
So, there's a huge problem with religion, internal conflicts, years of rebellions, unstable power structures, and on top of that, Elizabeth has no money. Her brother's advisors had devalued the currency to pay for a costly and pointless war in Scotland, and then Mary spent what was left on a long and pointless war for her husband. Elizabeth inherited a pretty stacked deck of cards that would cause a lot of trouble for any leader, not least a 25-year-old with a dubious history.
Mary of Guise has increased the French garrison in Scotland by 4,000 men.
Perhaps more.
Madam, I'm afraid the French mean to attack while we are still weak, and while your Majesty's reign is still uncertain.
What is your counsel?
Madam, we must with all haste raise an army to march upon Scotland.
Can we not send emissaries to...
There is no time for that! As Queen, we look to you for action, unless you are content to wait for the French to send more reinforcements.
But anyway, conflict. The film presents movie Elizabeth with the problem of the French trying to invade and a war between England and France involving Scotland because Mary of Guise is gonna invade England because she can, because she's an invading person.
Go back to England and take this to your queen. C'est du sang anglais sur un drapeau français. Renvoyez-le à sa reine. Faites en sorte que il reste bien vivant. Et dites à cette reine bâtarde de ne plus envoyer des enfants pour combattre Marie de Guise.
That evil Mary of Guise just being this evil French woman, but the film misses out that what is actually happening is the Scottish Reformation crisis, which Elizabeth was involved in up to her neck. So, Mary of Guise is ruling Scotland at this point for her daughter, Mary Queen of Scots, who is gallivanting around the place with her husband, the oldest son of Henri II of France. Now, Henri died not long after Elizabeth was crowned queen in 1559, making Mary Queen of Scots now Queen of France to go along with all her other titles. And little Mary isn't finished yet. She's also declared herself Queen of England, which doesn't make her many friends in the new Protestant government of Elizabeth. Meanwhile, Mama Mary of Guise has to maintain power over Scotland using French troops, and is trying to desperately keep a lid on the growing Scottish Reformation to Protestantism. A faction of Protestant Scottish lords made a treaty with Elizabeth that she would provide troops to support them. French and English forces fight, goes a bit pear-shaped for a while, until Mama Mary of Guise died, and made the French position very untenable.
C'est une sorcière! Une sale sorcière! Une sorcière! Et c'est serviteur du diable! Du diable! Du diable!
Mary of Guise did die in 1560, quite conveniently for the sake of Elizabeth, who made peace with France in the Treaty of Edinburgh. But no, she wasn't murdered sexily by Francis Walsingham on the orders of Elizabeth. Mary of Guise had swellings in her stomach and her legs, which rendered her unable to walk several months before she died, and an autopsy found no signs of foul play. And believe me, early modern writers were even more likely than overdramatic modern writers to look for conspiracies, and in the long list of deaths that people found suspicious in the century, Mary of Guise's is not amongst them. She also wasn't a weird incest aunt to any of the French princes, given that she was part of the royal family simply through her daughter's marriage. And that brings us to...
Majesty, may I present the French ambassador, His Excellency Monsieur Dufoy?
Your Excellency.
I suppose the French do offer some suitor to her.
Naturally. Everything now depends upon the husband that woman takes.
King Henry of Anjou sends you his brotherly love. He trusts that with your accession, the relationship between our countries may be much improved.
That is also my hope.
With such consideration, the king expects that you will consider the suit of his brother, the Duke of Anjou.
Naturally, Her Majesty will consider the proposal most carefully.
From the second that Elizabeth became queen, the big question was, who is she going to marry? After all, the country's in a state of ruin, there are small nations surrounded by much bigger ones, there's no money, the French are saying they've got a queen, and there's no one else to inherit the throne other than that French girl across the sea. And there's the small issue of the fact that it's the 16th century and no one believes that a woman could possibly rule and be in charge without having a husband to do all the hard bits for her. So, a whole line of suitors was lined up for Elizabeth, the most eligible bride in Europe.
No, because I am Anjou! Yes, I am Anjou, yes! I am Anjou! Yes. Oh, nom de Dieu, elle aime.
But they did not include this guy. This guy is the Duc d'Anjou, better known to history as Henri III of France, and massively conflated with a different Duc d'Anjou, who was Francis and Henri's little brother. Francis Duc d'Anjou did travel to England in disguise, did flirt with Elizabeth, did enter into an engagement with her in the 1580s, about 2 decades after this film is set, when Elizabeth was in her mid-40s. There was some talk of Henri courting Elizabeth in the 1570s, but you know, he called her a whore and insulted her age, so that was never really going to be a goer. And then the film, having already shown us that the French are duplicitous, evil, sexy, weird, evil people, goes a step further.
What? Huh? What? 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 You stare, madame. What is it? Do you see something strange, perhaps?
You are wearing a dress, Your Grace.
Oh, yes, I am wearing a dress. Yes, I'm wearing a dress. I wear a dress like this, my mother, and you know. But I only dress like this when I'm alone, in private, with my friends.
Your Grace. Although my affection for you is undiminished, I have, after an agonizing struggle, determined to sacrifice my own happiness for the welfare of my people.
Oh, my God.
Madame, I will explain.
Ce n'est pas la peine, Excellence. Je comprends tout.
Yeah. So, the filmmakers decided that being blatantly homophobic and transphobic was the best way to show that this potential marriage wasn't going to be going anywhere, instead of, I don't know, religious differences, just personality clash, any of the things that actually happened. But let's unpack this further. Henri III is often accused of being a depraved and vain gay man who had sexual relations with les mignons, the fashionable men that he kept around himself. And he was very extraordinarily close with them. But he was also very close, in a very real and sexual sense, with his 6 officially recorded mistresses, because human sexuality is complicated. It does not necessarily have a single 2-option binary of whether someone enjoys sex with men or women. Spin and propaganda are not a replacement for fact, and it's really gross to depict queerness through a lens that depicts it as an intense personal and moral failing, and that's the last thing I'm going to dignify this shitty writing decision with.
She's just a child, and yet still you piss yourselves!
Your Grace, Protestants are already returning from abroad.
Yes, and have made plans to massacre every Catholic in England. There would be butchery indeed if such a plan were even conceivable.
They say Walsingham will return from France.
Walsingham is nothing!
Francis Walsingham is a figure of Machiavellian intent throughout the film, this hidden Protestant badass who's always ready to do the right thing, even at great personal cost, because he just believes in England, damn it! England must be saved, and being the world's greatest ever investigative spy is the only way to solve all of Elizabeth's problems. In fact, he's her only true friend. None of this has any basis in the person Francis Walsingham actually was. He had been a Protestant exile in the reign of Mary I and slowly rose up through the ranks of government service through his connections with the French ambassador, becoming principal secretary with Sir Thomas Smith in 1573, in charge of Elizabeth's correspondence and the official seal for royal documents. He worked in espionage and foiled many plots, promoted England as a mercantile power, supported gross acts of colonialisation in Ireland, and was generally pretty overlooked as an advisor by Elizabeth, who overall tended to favour caution instead of action, and he died pretty much penniless in 1590. He was not Elizabeth's most trusted advisor, and certainly did not come up and feed her the idea of the Virgin Queen.
Am I to be made of stone? Must I be touched by nothing?
Aye, madam, to reign supreme. All men need something greater than themselves to look up to and worship. They must be able to touch the divine here on earth.
She had such power over men's hearts. They died for her.
They have found nothing to replace her.
I mean, why would I want my biopic of a woman I'm interested in to feature her doing stuff by herself when she could just be talked into doing everything by men? The Virgin Queen persona, brand, identity wasn't developed and actively used by Elizabeth until at least the 1570s, by the time she was unlikely to marry and have children. Anyway, Elizabeth's favourite advisor and arguable father figure was William Cecil, Lord Burleigh, played by Richard Attenborough and written very strangely.
Secrets, madam? You have no secrets. The world knows that Lord Robert visits your chambers at night and that you fornicate with him. It's even said that you already carry his child.
Yes, Sir William, I live my life in the open. I am surrounded by people. I do not understand how so bad a judgment has been formed of me.
He's just sort of there, ineffective, shouts at her about fornication, tries to get her to marry people, and is then forced to retire. It's quite an insulting depiction of a statesman who really did give everything to maintaining and stabilising England. He was Elizabeth's right-hand man, was a fond collector of trees, came from the same neck of the woods as me. He's a proper Lincolnshire lad, and was nursed while he was dying by Elizabeth herself. When she was nursing William Cecil on his literal deathbed in 1598, Elizabeth said she did not want to live any longer than she had with him, which made him cry. I'm sorry, but why was he relegated to being the guy who was wrong about every single decision and trying to force strong, independent women into getting married to politics for Francis Walsingham? Really? Elizabeth spoon-fed William Cecil with her own hands while Walsingham died in obscurity and debt. Nope, got to have sexually ambiguous guy talking Elizabeth out of being just a weak woman and to being cold and unfeeling woman of stone, despite Elizabeth famously being prone to outbursts of extreme emotion and being witty and charming and flirty and intelligent, but I guess that would be character depth.
If there is no uniformity of religious belief here, then there can only be fragmentation, dispute and quarrel.
Surely, my lords, it is better to have a single Church of England. With a common prayer book and a common purpose. I ask you to pass this act of uniformity,
Not for myself, but for my people.
The film condenses both these acts into one lump of parliamentary action, but they're two completely separate pieces of legislation. One of Elizabeth's most pressing needs when she came to the throne was to deal with the matter of religion. England had swung between Roman Catholic, English Catholic, Protestant, back to Roman Catholic, and religious practice was bitterly divided and confused. Elizabeth, in all her political dealings, always tended towards caution and sort of middle ground appeal. She's a Protestant, but she enjoyed aspects of Catholic faith, so the Elizabethan religious settlement aimed to create a middle ground to appeal to both sides, to create a sense of unity and loyalty that could defer back to the state. The Act of Uniformity of 1559 made the Protestant Book of Common Prayer the standard text for English churches, and that all people had to go to English churches or face fines. The Act of Supremacy 1559 made Elizabeth supreme governor of the Church of England, and that it was a crime to assert the authority of a foreign power, i.e. the Pope. Two separate acts, two different aims.
Where is Gardner? Where are the others?
Let us out! Open the door!
This is Walsingham's doing. It is the devil's work.
It will not serve her in any case. The bishops will pass no measure which severs us from Rome.
An agent of Elizabeth's government didn't need to lock up bishops to pass these acts. The acts were broadly supported by the House of Commons, who tended towards Protestant reform anyway, and whose numbers and support had been bolstered by the return of those who had lived in exile during Mary's reign. And, well, a lot of the senior archbishops and bishops were dead or under house arrest already, so not being able to contribute meaningfully to any votes due to not being there and not being present on this mortal coil.
I am your sovereign. I have been placed here. God has placed me here. I am your anointed sovereign. I am your queen, and like my father, I mean to rule. There is one thing higher than royalty, my lords, and that is religion.
This scene is perhaps my favourite in the whole film. It provides the most humanity for this Elizabeth as a historical figure. It's the only scene where I really felt a connection for her as a human being, and where she was really struggling to have agency over events. A lot of this film has her floating along, sort of manipulated and diverted by the men around her, who also tell her how to fix things. And yes, the real Elizabeth, she did like to wait. She was slow to react, and generally sort of waited until everyone around her had declared their hands before she laid out hers. But she did do things, and she did have control over government and strong opinions, and didn't defer or rely on men making decisions for her without her knowledge. Just saying.
It is not enough that English pirates attack and rob our ships, but we are to be made fools of in this court. The king, my master, has become impatient for your grace to act. If you will not, then others may.
You must reassure His Majesty that the time is close at hand. He must not act precipitously.
English pirate!
His Majesty has also had a rumor.
And the world is filled with rumors, Monseigneur.
That your grace has made contact with Mary of Scots to promote your ambitions. Even that you mean to marry her.
You suppose me an idiot? Your master is the most powerful man in the world. I would not cross him for my life.
So the ongoing arc of tension, the sort of the Freytag's pyramid throughout this film, is the scheming antics of Christopher Eccleston's villainous Duke of Norfolk and his band of incorrectly titled Catholic malcontents who seek to put Norfolk on the throne. They draw in the person that Elizabeth trusts the most, Robert Dudley, to do some ineffective assassination attempts. They get the Pope involved to do some murder, and then they get Walsinghamed. Right, okay. It's the plot built of nonsense and bullshit.
Your Grace, the Queen is with child.
They should have consulted me before they rang the bells.
For a start, the Duke of Norfolk isn't just some random Catholic lord. He's Thomas Howard, cousin to the Queen, and he's a pretty powerful nobleman. He represented Elizabeth in the north, led her army into Scotland against Mary of Guise, and negotiated treaties between the Protestant Scottish lords and Elizabeth. He's not exactly a long-standing enemy seeking to take Elizabeth down, but like many cousins and relatives of the Tudors, he does meet a sticky end.
What is the meaning of this?
Your Grace is arrested. You must go with these men to the Tower.
I must do nothing by your orders. I am Norfolk.
You were Norfolk. The dead have no titles. You were the most powerful man in England. And could have been greater still. But you had not the courage to be loyal. Only the conviction of your own vanity.
I think, Walsingham, a man's courage is in the manner of his death. I am content to die for my beliefs. So cut off my head and make me a martyr. The people will always remember it.
No. They will forget.
The Rising of the North was an uprising of Catholic lords in 1569, so 10 years after the events of this movie, to oust Elizabeth for Mary Queen of Scots, who, after sort of maybe murdering her second husband and then marrying her third, who was the most hated man of Scotland, and then they got beaten and now she was living in exile in England. The Earls of Westmoreland and Northumberland, not Arundel and Sussex, occupied Durham, held mass in the cathedral, marched around the north of England for a bit before being crushed in battle. Northumberland and many rebels were executed, Westmoreland ran away, and no one got murdered while they were sat on the toilet. Notice a name I didn't say. Yeah, the Duke of Norfolk. He was arrested for being involved because he sort of vaguely had this idea about marrying Mary Queen of Scots and trying to be king that way, and his daughters were married to the rebels, but he got imprisoned for that plot, and then on release was involved in a completely different plot to get rid of Elizabeth, the Ridolfi plot. This was the plot that involved the Spanish ambassador, but not the one they browned up James Frayne to play. After the Ridolfi plot, Norfolk got put on trial and was executed. I guess that's the consequence of trying to get a queen for your fourth wife. But anyway, definitely not an evil mastermind. And as for the other member of the plot,
I've been waiting. Your Majesty.
They're all gone to the tower. Your friends? Tell me, how should I serve thee, Robert?
My course is run.
Just tell me why.
Why? Madam. Is it not plain enough to you? It is no easy thing to be loved by the Queen. It would corrupt the soul of any man. Now, for God's sake, kill me.
No.
Robert Dudley, world famous for being Elizabeth's lifelong friend and companion, possible romantic love, potential husband, but perennial disappointment. And presented here as just this miserable asshole who blames Elizabeth for him being an asshole. It's so hard to love a queen. Dudley's inclusion in this plot is utterly baffling. He is presented as Elizabeth's childhood love, but also a deceiver, because he's actually married and he, fucks one of her waiting women to death with a poisoned dress that he knew had been sent by him, maybe? Even though Elizabeth was a guest at his wedding, and then he's happy to go along with a papal plot. The idea is laughable. Robert Dudley, who at this point of time is a long way off from being Earl of Leicester, was an exceptionally strict and pious Protestant. He was basically a proto-Puritan, and he identified with the stricter, purer ideals of Protestantism more aligned with the thoughts of John Calvin. He was a Privy Councillor and a linchpin of Elizabethan government until his death in 1588. And he's the last person in England to consider being part of a Catholic plot.
Madam, you cannot marry Lord Robert. He's already married.
But I get it. Elizabeth's got to become a cold-hearted figurehead of England for the sake of the nation. So she has to get her heart broken and the last vestiges of her humanity and naivety destroyed. But what's baffling is that the filmmakers decided to not use the actual thing that destroyed Robert Dudley's credibility. The death of his first wife. Dudley's first wife, the one Elizabeth claimed to not know, died in mysterious circumstances, and many believe that he might have murdered her to marry Elizabeth. Doesn't that make a more compelling source of emotional tension? That Elizabeth has driven the man she loves too possible, but not probably when you actually read the autopsy reports, wife murder. Isn't that a greater betrayal than this nonsense? The performances are mostly across the board great. The art direction sumptuous, if sometimes melodramatic, campy, struggling under the weight of prestige. The costumes are beautiful, often, and I can recognise key ones that Elizabeth's wearing from her actual portraiture. At other times, a lot of the women's costumes veer into generic female period costume with those terrible Tudor hoods and blending the distinct decades of the 16th century all together. Nearly every actor is giving it their all, although it is often undeserved by the material they were given. Cate Blanchett does a fantastic tall performance, but too often the film lapses into presenting an almost portrait-like view of Elizabeth. All style, very little substance. There Elizabeth seems to do very little for herself. She's often this little cardboard Elizabeth little doll at the mercy of events, swayed and manipulated by the men around her, and I think sort of suffers from a lack of personal choice through her emotional arc. Nearly everything she does is prompted by someone telling her what to do. Her decisions often feel that they were not ones of her own making. It makes for frustrating viewing if you've studied the real Elizabeth, because Blanchett is given chance to show the charm, the wit, the fury of the real Elizabeth, but at times it feels like a pastiche of what a man believes women should find empowering about her story. The story itself is a jumbled mash of real events, often amped up for maximum drama. I know that's a ridiculous criticism of a biopic, because they lie and distort things for dramas, but the level of misinformation felt particularly dishonest here. The life and early years in power for Elizabeth were legitimately full of tension, intrigue, terror and heartbreak. The real events were not only far more interesting, but would make a better, more emotionally satisfying film. Have Robert Dudley appear guilty of his wife's murder to make Elizabeth feel betrayed. Have her argue and charm and barter and work to have her acts passed. Have her work to rebuild the currency, the reputation of her country, unity in a nation so deeply riddled by division. Feels intellectually dishonest to the audience to present this fantasy version of her life, as if the writer didn't believe people in the 20th century could possibly keep their attention to a story unless it had gratuitous murder, weird sex scenes, disgust for queer people, slow-mo assassin priests, and toilet death. The film is stifled under the weight of a need to be worthy to win those awards, and it suffers as a result of it. So, final verdict? This film is mostly fiction, and not even particularly interesting fiction. There's a reason why this film isn't as remembered as, say, its direct competitor that year, Shakespeare in Love. And they both have Geoffrey Rush in them, and Joseph Fiennes. And it was clear which film that Joseph Fiennes put effort into, and it was definitely not this one.